Phil was a 34-year-old avid scuba diver. He had advanced open water and cavern diving certifications. His house was near this freshwater cave system that offered pristine water and interesting diving. He has taken cave diving lessons but was never serious enough to pursue a full cave diving certification. He believed there wasn't much of a difference whether you have a dive certification or not, except for the cost. He prioritized experience more, it seemed. One time, Phil and his two friends Rex and Evan planned a dive inside that cavern near their houses. So on a nice, warm, clear morning, the three divers arrived at the cave mouth. They set up on a single air cylinder. They each had a separate phony bottle they had planned to use at the safety stop at the end of the dive. If you don't know, a phony bottle is a small diving cylinder which is fitted with an independent regulator and carried by a diver as an extension to the scuba set. Now, Phil and his two buddies didn't really have a plan for this dive. All they knew was that they are going to explore inside the cave despite not even having proper gear. Once they were done prepping at the cave mouth, they decided to set off. All three one by one entered the water by climbing down a set of stairs and then floated out into the crystal clear water. Phil didn't like the extra tank clipped to his buoyancy compensator, so recklessly he left his own spare tank outside the cave entrance. He planned to use it for his safety stop, so he reasoned that it would be ready for him when he got back. He thought in the meantime he would be able to have fun not having to carry the additional drag. So, the trio swam further into the cave, exploring the beauty of the underwater environment. Slowly with time, they moved off inside the cave from the light zone of the cavern. In this section, it was just darkness. There was no light. They literally couldn't see anything. If it weren't for their lights, they would have been in serious danger. So with the little light they had, they continued exploring. They made sure to take their time. By this point, they were almost 200 feet inside the cave when one of the worst nightmares of any diver happened to Phil. He took a breath from his regulator and nothing came out. Rex and Evan were together close by, but with panicking in the darkness, it took Phil a while to get Rex's attention. The second he saw Phil signaling to him, he knew what was going on, so Rex immediately gave his phony bottle to Phil. As Evan also learned about the situation, both he and Rex managed to calm Phil. He couldn't believe the mess he had made of this dive. He should have brought his extra tank with him. He was thankful to Rex and Phil for bringing their phony bottles. Otherwise, Phil would have run out of air and died right then and there deep inside the cave. But now, there was no time for regret. Their nightmare only just started. They quickly decided to get to the surface now that they are low on gas. So the trio began heading toward the exit. By this point, not only Phil, but Rex and Evan also started running out of gas. Now, the problem was that they both had only one phony bottle as a reserve. Remember, Phil's extra tank was back at the safety stop point so that they would have reserve air to breathe once they exited the cave. But Phil failed to make sure that the gas he brought with him was enough to explore inside the cave and also get back to the safety stop, which is basically the exit. It's almost like he never had an extra air tank in the first place. Or maybe he probably never would have expected that he would need it much sooner. But either way, now in order to use it, they had to first get to it, which means having to get to the cave exit, which is exactly the problem. So now that they turned around and were on their way back to the exit, Phil signaled that he would follow behind Rex and Evan. It seemed that he wanted to get control of his breathing as he earlier panicked a lot. So therefore he is now following behind his two friends, which is when he started feeling like he cannot breathe. It was his air supply. As he struggled to inhale, by the second, it got more and more difficult to draw a breath from the phony tank. Yeah, that means the air in the reserve tank was also nearly gone. Phil came to an agonizing realization, though Rex and Evan had no idea. They were so focused on not spending too much of their gas that they had thought Phil was right behind them, but in reality, he wasn't. In fact, he was missing. When they realized that, they were already at the safety spot, which is the cave exit. They knew at that point, Phil must probably be dead. It was such a harsh reality for them to accept. Later that day, a recovery team had found Phil's corpse and brought it out of the cave. There is no way to exactly know about his last moments or what exactly happened to him on the way out behind Rex and Evan. Maybe he panicked too much, or maybe he got lost, or maybe both. But his death was declared a drowning from being trapped inside a cave with an exhausted gas supply. You see, Phil violated more than one rule of cave diving. Without any safety measures, they moved beyond the light zone. The fact that they were nearly 200 feet deep inside a cave without enough gas is just already enough reason as to why things turned out the way they did. At the age of 33, Bill had been a certified scuba diver for a decade. He usually went diving a few times a year and hadn't had any advanced training courses, but he was very knowledgeable as he had read articles about diving and underwater explorations. He had a dream to dive alongside legendary explorers he read about in stories. In fact, he was confident that someday he will be able to. He just wanted to earn his spot on an expedition by proving he had been there and done that. He wanted to do something extraordinary with diving for that. So with that goal in mind, he planned a dive with his buddy Tony. On that morning, it was cloudy and cool, not too bad for diving. The sea was calm and the wind wasn't as strong. So they took a charter boat to the dive location. It was steady enough to handle the waves. About an hour passed, they reached their dive site. With Bill and Tony, several other divers were there to make a dive, except they had a different destination to reach in their dive. They all teamed into groups, so Bill and Tony as a team first geared up to enter the water before others. When the boat crew gave the go-ahead, the duo jumped into the water. Their destination was a shipwreck rest at 120 feet of seawater. Though Bill and Tony had no intention of descending all the way down to the seabed. They planned to penetrate the wreck from an opening on the main deck and make their way into the famed interior cargo hold. For them, it felt like trying to reach Mount Everest. They had to be quick and not waste too much of their energy and gas. Both were using a standard recreational diving setup with a single aluminum 80 cubic foot tank each. They had limited bottom time as the ascent and descent would already take most of their dive time. So what they planned was to get in, take a few selfies and ascend back to the surface. So, for the first few minutes of the dive, everything went smoothly. After a brief body check, the duo began their descent along the anchor chain. They tried their best to control their breathing as they wanted to conserve as much air as possible. That way, they could spend slightly longer at the shipwreck taking more selfies. However, they were able to get to the wreck a bit sooner than they thought, which was already good news. They quickly found the doorway to inside the passage that would lead them to the cargo hold. After a final okay, they took off inside the wreck. Bill was the first one to enter and Tony was right behind him. At least that's what Bill thought, but within a minute or two, when Bill tried checking on Tony, he was gone. Nowhere to be seen. Apparently, Tony had stopped for a second to look down a passageway. But when he looked back at Bill, he was gone, fully out of his sight. Tony wasn't going to risk exploring the wreck on his own, so instead he searched around trying to find Bill, but after several minutes his time was up to ascend. He turned around and made his way out of the ship. Although he should be ascending by that point, he still decided to wait near the passageway for Bill for several more minutes. Meanwhile, on the other side of the wreck, Bill was safe and sound. Although he lost sight of Tony, he wasn't too worried about it. Once he reached the cargo hold of the wreck, he knew he accomplished his goal. This wreck is not like the others. Only one diver had ever gotten to this wreck and explored inside. He was considered a legend at the time. So Bill knew him being the second diver to ever touch this wreck, he was also going to be a legend. So he got some photos and spent some time exploring and enjoying the wreck. However, there was a problem, and it was a deadly one. So when Bill was having the time of his life, Tony was still waiting outside of the shipwreck. He couldn't just leave his friend. But after a while, he had no choice. He had to begin his ascent as he was running low on gas. Once he surfaced, he looked around for Bill, but no, he wasn't anywhere near his side to be seen. Tony kept on checking his watch to see the time, and once the time they had planned to end the dive was past and still Bill didn't surface, Tony knew it was about time he alerted the boat crew. Immediately recovery divers were called in and they began a search for Bill. After hours, Bill was found in the cargo hold. His tank was empty. What exactly happened to him or what the problem Bill faced inside the wreck was never found. Whatever it was, it made Bill not want to ascend. Maybe he didn't know how to get out of the shipwreck, or maybe he panicked seeing something inside the wreck and exhausted all his air. Nonetheless, Bill's official cause of death was stated as a drowning due to insufficient air. You could consider this case a mystery, but considering all the bad things that could happen to a human underwater, maybe Bill's death is not such a mystery. Either way, both people in both stories were met with tragic fates. Their deaths should never have happened like the way they did. Humans make mistakes and you always pay a price for that. Sometimes it could be money, a loss of a friendship, a relationship, or even sometimes it could be your own life, or even worse, the life of someone else. Stay safe out there guys. We have got to the end of today's video and I will see you guys soon with another story. Goodbye.